Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Rob Morandi. I'm a first-year MBA student at Sloan and one of the student organizers for the conference. It's my pleasure today to introduce Andrew Brandt, who will be discussing a topic that he has talked about frequently on ESPN and Sports Illustrated, and the title of his presentation is called Marijuana as Medicine. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks to Sloan Conference for having me speak on pot. So we can talk about marijuana. What I'm going to talk about mainly is sort of how it relates to sports, whether societal acceptance is going to translate into sports acceptance, and specifically sports leagues as medicinally and maybe even recreationally, but primarily as a pain management tool. And the league we're going to focus on the most, of course, is the NFL. It's where I have my experience. It's what I've been covering, and whether the NFL would consider moving to a more relaxed stance, a more evolved stance, perhaps, about marijuana. And I know a lot of you are listening to that and saying, yeah, good luck with that. But perhaps there's enough societal tolerance, there's enough motion in place to see if this is going to happen. So we'll talk about it. It's interesting, I'm here in Boston in this Heinz Convention Center, which is attached to the plaza with the Prudential Tower, because as some of you know, my background, I was an agent for many years before I worked for the Green Bay Packers for 10 years. But while being an agent, I worked in this building, or generally. I was an agent for Bob Wolf Associates here in Boston. And why I bring that up is because my client at that time, sort of the watershed client of my career, was a guy named Ricky Williams. Ricky Williams can relate to this topic. I never saw, let me say this, I never saw the marijuana use that is so prevalent in talking about Ricky Williams. I never saw that. I do know he was a different cat. You know, he was a little different. But I will say this, one of the most, if not the most interesting athlete I've been around hundreds of them, and had a way of talking about things that made you think. And usually with athletes, you're sort of limited to topics because they're very young. They don't have life experience. But Ricky did, and Ricky was interesting. And yes, I never did complete my representation of Ricky Williams. He fired me for someone named Master P, and asked me if I wanted to work for Master P, because he didn't want to work for these guys in Boston, but he liked me, but he wanted me to work for P. I said, me and P? He said, yeah. I said, well, I don't know about that. You know, I don't know. I'm calling my wife, should I work for a rapper? You know, is that where I'm going here? But it's funny, getting off topic for just a minute, that is one of those life moments where serendipity happens, where one door opens, another closes. I was getting fired by Ricky. I was considering working for Master P. I was meeting Percy Miller, that's his name, a little street cred there. And the Green Bay Packers are calling me, and they're calling me repeatedly. Now, I had one client there, it was a third-string quarterback who just retired, named Matt Hasselbeck, speaking of Boston. But Matt didn't need a contract. They said, well, why? I finally called back, listen, I can't talk to you now. I got Ricky Williams, I got Master P. They said, we're not calling about Hasselbeck. I said, why are you calling me? Well, Mike Holmgren just went to the Seattle Seahawks. Okay, I watch SportsCenter, I get it. Well, he took the guy that ran the whole operation. I said, okay. They said, how'd you like to switch sides? So I had to choose between Green Bay or Master P, and I chose the Packers. So that's what sort of left my last impression of being an agent was with Ricky. Now, I saw Ricky many times since, and he was very good to me. So that's where we are now. And Ricky transitions, obviously, to sort of marijuana as medicine. What we know is happening, everyone knows, we've got some legislation. Things are happening. And just in 2016, all these ballot measures that passed, both recreationally and medicinally. So you have these measures that passed in yellow, and on the recreational side, Maine, Massachusetts, hello, Nevada, California, full legalization. And then on the medicinal side, Florida, Arkansas, North Dakota, Montana just passed. And now we have 21 that are allowing legalization on the medicinal side, 9 on the recreational side, including DC. And then you have this 21 that are illegal. But that is a sea change. Things are happening. And again, stigmatization is a huge issue here. So what we're having is nationally, legislatively, stigmatization is slowly fading away. Now listen, I'm not saying there's a treatment or acceptance of marijuana like there is, say, alcohol or even tobacco, but it's getting there. So this is societal. This has nothing to do with sports, except when you sort of drill down. So with all this happening, I'm often asked, not only by fans and media, but I'm asked by players, especially NFL players, does this mean that we can light up if we play in these states, or we're at home in these states, or whatever? And the answer is no. No. Because you're governed by NFL law, which is different than that law. NFL law is collectively bargained. And there's the president. It's collectively bargained. It is a bargaining issue, which is really the theme of marijuana in all these sports leagues. It's easy to say, well, this state, that state, hey, you play for the Patriots, you should use it as a medicinal because it's allowed, or recreational, but no. The NFL law is the collective bargaining agreement. The collective bargaining agreement, of course, I covered those negotiations more than any sane person should. And these are all the issues. Now, one issue I never heard of, I heard about player conduct. Obviously, the most important issue, the revenue split, how much money each side gets. You talk about franchise tags. You talk about all these issues of practice time. But never did I hear a discussion in those negotiations, now 5 years ago, about marijuana. That was not a topic that was going to be front and center. And in a multi-issue negotiation, you have to prioritize where you're going to lead, where you're going to try to make gains. That wasn't one of them. So it is collectively bargained. Now, everyone knows Roger Goodell as what I call the conduct commissioner, and certainly they know that in this area. But when we talk about pot, when we talk about marijuana, and people make this, well, deflated football is this many games, marijuana only this many games, or punching your wife, or you can't make that comparison. You can't, because those are part of the conduct policy. Those where we know so well from the past 3 years that Roger Goodell has this unfettered power to discipline for player conduct. We know that. That's discretionary. The marijuana thing is not discretionary. It's in there. It's in the CBA. It's negotiated. So it's not like the personal conduct policy. Now, one thing since the negotiating of the CBA in 2011, we have had an amendment. We have a union and a league that everyone knows don't really get along. So the NFLPA and the NFL really can't agree on the color of the sky, but they have agreed on a new drug policy within the past couple years. So there was a revision. But the key thing in that drug policy, or the revised drug policy, is that now we have HGH testing, which is sort of more of a restriction on players, more of an owner gain. But here's what the owners gave up: lower standards on marijuana. Okay, you're still tested, there's still discipline, all those things, but the standards have been lowered. In other words, the threshold has been raised, and what I'm trying to say is that you need more pot in your system to test positive. It was raised from 15 nanograms per milliliter, I'm not a scientist, to 35. 35. Now, for comparison purposes, we're still under the level that triggers a positive in these other testing bodies, such as Major League Baseball. That's 50 nanograms. And WADA, World Anti-Doping Association, for Olympics, for international competition, is 150 nanograms. So what was happening with the NFL players is they were testing positive for this tiny amount, 15 nanograms, in their system, and that's something they wanted to correct, and they did, because it was even, the language I kept hearing was, players are testing positive for secondhand smoke. Now, I don't know how many players, seem to be around guys smoking pot all the time, but they were being positive tested for that. So that's where the standards were raised to recently. So we do have a revised drug policy with higher standards to test positive for marijuana. So there's the progress. There's the progress. But to say this is going to be legalized with football players, no, we're not there yet. Now, having said that, what's the testing? If you have nothing in your background to promote reasonable cause, the testing now is what I call an intelligence test. You've got to stay clean for this one period. That's all. For the off season, starts on 4/20. Now, how about that? Starts on April 20th. That can't be random, right? They had to be sitting in that bargaining session. All right, let's start the testing on April 20th. Someone had, come on. And I bet, there are owners in the room saying, that sounds good. Nothing about that date. Anyway, and it goes through August 9th. So in that period, you're tested. So if you, again, we're the cynical among us, if you are a habitual user of marijuana and it cycles out in however much time it takes, you have a period, which, again, you call an intelligence test. But people who do test positive in this time, we're talking about a problem, right? We're talking about they know what we just said. It's only once, but they can't stop. Or we're in a pain management issue, which we'll talk about in a minute. So again, quickly going through this, I don't want to spend too much time on sort of the stages as we talk about marijuana testing in sports, specifically the NFL, which is kind of the beacon for the other sports leagues. A player who does fail a test in that period we talked about, or even combine, pre-employment, is placed in stage 1, where that's really set up as an individual treatment plan. Again, this is all trying to be rehabilitative. This is all trying to be counseling-oriented. So you have that treatment plan for 90 days. If you violate the treatment plan with a positive test, or otherwise, there may be counseling standards in that you may miss some treatments, you may miss some appointments. Perhaps that could be a violation. There's a fine, and it's a 3-week fine. I say games, but you're paid according to 17 weeks. There's 16 games, so it's 3/17 of your salary. And then, of course, it's important to note in stage 1, we're not talking about missed time. We're not talking about game suspensions. We go to stage 2, there you have the random testing. So if you're placed in stage 2 with a violation from stage 1, now it's up to 10 times a month. That is random. And I've been around a lot of players through my time in Green Bay that would get that notice at whatever time in the morning, and they'd have 4 hours to produce a sample, no matter where they were. And most of the time it happens in the off season where they're wherever. They have to let their counselor know where they're going to be. So if you're in stage 2, there is a lot of protection in place that they're going to find you. And if you don't produce a sample, it doesn't matter. If you're caught up on a plane or whatever it is, you have to produce a sample. If you don't, that's a positive test. Stage 2 duration, again, depending on your personal situation, can be 12 to 24 months. And the violation of stage 2, initial violation will not get you in stage 3, will not get you a suspension, but it'll get you a fine. Now, that's a 2/17 fine, and it's important to note, we do have, again, I'm not saying we're there yet, but it's a little more tolerant than, for instance, PEDs, which is a 4-week fine. This is a 2-week fine. You have a second stage 2 violation, then you move to stage 3 with a suspension. And again, depending on the situation, that could be 4 to 6 games, which again, when you're talking about football, that's at least a quarter of your salary for the year. That's a strong penalty. We go to stage 3, and there you're talking about banishment, perhaps, If you have a stage 3 violation, initially it's going to be a 10-game suspension, and additional violations would be a banishment or a 1-year suspension, 1-year banishment, again, we should say, with the ability to reapply for reinstatement. If you're in stage 3, you basically are in stage 3 the rest of your career. Even if you go out of football, come back, you're going to be in stage 3. And that, again, has that same status as stage 2, which is the unannounced testing every 10 times a month. Wherever you are, you have to produce that sample. So again, a lot of restrictions on marijuana use in the NFL. There is some lessening of some tolerance because we see these fines that are less than PED fines. So we'll see if there's openness going forward. Now, we switch from marijuana use and the recreational side to more the pain management side and whether we have some traction. That, I'll say up front, that seems to be where we're going with this. If we're going to have traction on tolerance for marijuana, the traction is not going to be on recreational use, okay? As stodgy as some of these owners and commissioners are, they will consider, I think, the medicinal advantages of marijuana as we talk about. I think the recreational is going to be trouble, especially now with the new administration. President Trump saying we're going to go revisit this recreational legalization of marijuana, but left open the medicinal side. Now, there was a study in the Washington Post a couple years ago that talked about 1 in 4 players, that's 25% of all players, they felt some pressure by team doctors to take opioids, to take these opiates. We're talking about Vicodin, we're talking about Oxycontin, we're talking about these pills that are strong pain relievers. 7% were taking it, 3 times the national rate. And then there's the issue of Toradol. Toradol is a powerful drug. The administration of Toradol has changed. Now there are strict rules in the NFL on when it can be administered primarily as a prophylactic after surgery for pain management. But up until this time, it really was used on a, what I can say, an abusive way. I remember at the Packers, when we had players come in from other teams, we did not use Toradol that much. Players would come in. I remember a guy coming to me, we had just picked him up from another team through a trade, and the first Saturday he's there, he comes to me, he says, where do I get my Toradol shot? I said, what are you talking about? I get shot every before the game. I said, but you're not hurt. Yeah. No matter. So it's part of what he said is armor. And I found this all along with players getting Toradol shots on Saturday, on Sunday pregame, on Sunday postgame. I'm like, whoa. That is a powerful drug. I cannot speak to its use now. Again, we have these new standards. But my experience is that was an overused drug in the NFL. And again, as we talk about alternatives to pain management with marijuana, this is something to look at. The advocacy for pain management, I think, has to come from the player side. And what we see is not a lot of active players stepping out to do this. So we see former players fill the void. Former players whose lives have been affected by overuse of opioids. Former players who seem to be getting advantages from pain management with the use of marijuana. Former players willing to take a stand and maybe not risking being cut, having career decline because of this, being stigmatized by owners, by teams because of this. So we now have former players stepping into the breach. Jake Plummer, former quarterback for the Cardinals and the Broncos, very much an advocate for cannabis use and has started companies towards that end. And the one player that I've seemed to focus on that I interviewed on my podcast, I've heard him talk, is Eugene Monroe. He's a former lineman. He was the 8th pick overall in the 2008 or 9 draft. And he's been very vocal. He has been very vocal because he said when he was initially in the league, he was given these Vicodins, just like handed out like candy. He said, take this. And he has since developed problems because of an overuse. So he turned, through a friend, through a situation, he turned to marijuana and has obviously been pain-free or had a much better experience with pain management as compared to opioids. He is now seeking, he has become this spearhead to seek this change from the NFL, and has sort of led discussions, and those discussions are happening. How far they are, it's hard to know. As an opioid replacement, and this is where it gets interesting, as beneficial towards neuroprotection, because we haven't even mentioned concussions. That's going to be a key issue here. That may be a way to move into the consciousness of sports owners, especially football, with the concussion issue. I saw the concussion issue brew over all these years. Now we're on this upward trajectory where everything is about head safety. That may be a way for the marijuana issue to come to the forefront, because we have so much concern about concussion and head trauma, especially future trauma, that this may be a way for marijuana to make its way into the consciousness of owners, management, commissioners, et cetera. And Monroe is putting his money where his mouth is. He has donated to Johns Hopkins, University of Pennsylvania, to study this in terms of pain management, treatment, PTSD, CTE, and of course, children with epilepsy, going very far in really drilling down what advantages we can get from the use of marijuana for pain management. These are some of his quotes. He talks about his first few years in the league, getting that Vicodin prescription, and then he talks about Toradol, how often that was being used, and Toradol being used as a, like I said, kind of a game armor, a natural use that was almost given. Like, yeah, of course, we take Toradol. He's talked about marijuana. There's no reason for punishment of a substance that's much safer and less toxic than many of the drugs the NFL team doctors prescribe on a daily basis. It's archaic. Someone is consistently breaking down a lot of the bad information on cannabis. We know it is a lot safer than many things allowed and promoted by the NFL, like alcohol and tobacco. That's a strong statement. And we don't know if we're there. Again, we're going to follow the science, but this is where the advocacy is coming from. It's hard to get current players involved with the lack of protection they have, unguaranteed contracts, short career lengths, high injury risk. It's hard for players to be active that are going to be vocal about this. It comes from former players. So the follow the science I mentioned before, when we talk about follow the science, concussions, I remember when Roger Goodell, DeMaurice Smith, the head of the union, sat in front of Congress in 2009, and they were compared to, gasp, the tobacco industry, because they were so lax on concussion management, prevention, and protocols. Since then, what have we had? We've had stepped up protocols. We've had stepped up punishments for violent hits. We have taken away the kickoff, basically from football, encouraging people to have touchbacks, because in all the research, the NFL has found that the most concussive play is the kickoff return. So what are they doing? They're trying to limit kickoff returns and maybe even take them out. I would think in 5 years, no more kickoff returns, because it is the most concussive play in the sport. They're trying. But what they've done on concussions has been follow the science. What is it telling us? And that has been led to this trajectory. I think the problem with the NFL is that there are not first movers in previously taboo subjects. They follow others. We know Adam Silver's going to be here today. He has sort of led discussion in areas where the NFL has not really gone. He had the op-ed about gambling a couple years ago, is open to it, has said to bring it out in the light. The NHL is putting a team in Vegas. We know that's starting this year. So what the NFL is, okay, let that happen, we'll follow. And of course, there's a lot of discussion about the Raiders, whether they will or will not go to Vegas. Discussion about gambling. Again, with gambling, the NBA, the NHL, Major League Baseball, all investors in daily fantasy. Investors. NFL say, no, we're not going to invest. We're not going to have an equity stake. We're not going there yet. But you have owners like Robert Kraft, Jerry Jones, who are investors in DraftKings. So you do have that. So I think the NFL has to watch and wait. See, what are these other commissioners doing? NBA position on North Carolina, LGBT. Now you see the NFL taking a position like that in Texas, conveniently after the Super Bowl left town. You have the NBA entering the jersey sponsorship area. That's been a previously off-limits area for the NFL, although practice jerseys do have sponsors on with the NFL. And all the other leagues do have lighter standards, although the same standards, but lighter than the NFL on marijuana. We still have the stigma. The stigma is going to be there. That's something we have to deal with. But as we keep talking about, that stigma is slowly lessening, where maybe we have traction on marijuana. And as I mentioned, we have a new administration that seems intent on rolling back some of the recreational use. I don't think it'll translate down to the medicinal. Ultimately, it has to come from the players. I mean, it's almost unfortunate to say, but this has always been, and unless things change, will still be a bargaining issue. So right now, as we went through in the first part of this talk about the standards, well, they have been relaxed, but they're still there. So if the NFLPA, the players, the former players, the players themselves want to reduce or get rid of any kind of marijuana penalties, it's got to be a bargaining issue. They have to go to the NFL and say, we're willing to do this. And of course, what are the NFL owners going to say? What are you going to give us? What are you going to give us? It all comes back to negotiation. It all comes back to the bargaining table. We're in a collective bargaining agreement now that goes for 4 more years. So they've already revised the drug policy once. Is it going to happen again? I don't know. I don't think so. Not before the end of the agreement, which is 2021. And when that happens, who knows how many states are going to be legalized marijuana. And then it's going to be easier to do that. But I know these guys can be relentless in negotiation. The commissioner, the owners, trying to get every little drop they can. What are the players going to give up for this? Well, the players, if you saw in the news actually today and yesterday, they want to treat this as a health and safety issue. Treat it as something that's not bargained. Treat it like they treat concussions. Make sure every player is treated with the utmost concern for health and safety and pain management, and marijuana would help that. That's a tough sell, though. Because as I said, there's still some stigma, there's still some resistance, especially compared to like alcohol and tobacco. So unfortunately, a pain management issue may end up being a bargaining tool. We'll see. Because one thing that came out of the negotiation last time was all these reduced practice time, which I know coaches complain about, reduced time in the off season, only 14 padded practices throughout the season. This is all in the name of head safety, all in the name of health and safety. If the NFL is serious about that, and all sports, then they should accept pain management and marijuana if the science tells them that. And we have advocates that are saying that. Again, I'm not a scientist, but if the science does show this as a safer alternative than opioids, you think it should go there. We'll see. We'll see if the NFL decides this is less a bargaining issue than a health and safety issue. Of course, the players want it treated that way. The owners are always looking for whatever incremental gains they can make. They're searching under every rock for revenue. They're searching under every opportunity to make gains with players, even though they have a favorable agreement. We'll see where that goes. 30 seconds. But I will take questions if we have time. Yes, sir. How much capacity does the NFL have?
Can they actually do something given that, in theory, it wouldn't be able to be applied to every team equally, depending on where the team is and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, again, we talk about the real laws, like you said, and we talk about NFL laws. Through bargaining, they can make things happen. That's why I think on the medicinal side, as long as we have scientific coverage, as long as we have doctors involved with this, I think they can do that. The question is, they're going to look at exactly what you said. We can talk about the 20-something states where it's legal. What about the 20 where it's not? And that's going to be the resistance that the owners have, along with their own personal feeling about marijuana and stigma. Yes? Was there someone here? Yes?
So one of the glaring holes in the NFL CBA is that it doesn't cover CTE.
Yeah.
So what needs to happen for that to be covered in the future?
Well, CTE is not covered and more importantly in the settlement. There's been a massive settlement on concussion liability. The NFL has settled the case. It is for dementia, for Alzheimer's, for ALS, for Parkinson's, but does not cover CTE. That is something that you would hear the plaintiffs say it is, plaintiffs' lawyers say it is covered. The symptoms of CTE are covered within that. I think that's a problem. Now, we have this settlement. I understand why they did it, because these things are the NFL would last that litigation for 10, 12 years. Players wanted to solve it. They know they'd have causation issues in the settlement. They've resolved that issue. CTE going forward is going to be something the NFL has to look at, because if we have these continued stories of players experiencing these symptoms, the NFL is going to have a PR problem. Now, do they already? Well, again, the sample size of players that are tested for CTE, especially here at BU, is about 95%, but these are players with issues. So it's a slanted sample. Players with issues donate their brains for discovery of CTE. Players without issues or happy lives are not the ones donating their brains. So again, the NFL will tell you CTE is symptomatic of a lot of different things, not playing football. And again, I sat in a potential deposition. They asked this player, how long did you play football? 5 years. Why are you suing the NFL? Well, what about the bike accident? What about your lifestyle? What about when you slipped on the ice? What about just getting older? Those kind of things, that's why CTE is so hard to pin down in one area. But again, bringing it back to this, there are studies showing pain management for CTE is helped through cannabis. Got a wrap? I'll talk to you guys outside. Thanks so much. Enjoyed doing it.